Well, we've got some stuff to talk about, folks. Hello, folks. Phil Gallagher, aka ThrabenU, here for another, I guess, legacy and modern video. We've got a massive BNR update today, and we have a lot of things to talk about and analyze and break down. Give me 2 minutes here. I'm going to do some businessy stuff at the beginning of this video. So I'm going to release this video as soon as it is done uploading. I'm probably going to release this video late Monday afternoon. This is going to take the place of my normal Tuesday video at 11 o'clock a.m. and everything else that was scheduled to release this week is going to get pushed back one day. So post-ban content will start next Monday. YouTube members, you are going to gain access to a ton of early release post-banning content in the not too distant future. I am planning on going on a recording rampage on Friday and Saturday. You will probably get 4 or 5 early access videos this weekend. So just kind of keep that in mind if you were considering wanting to watch your post-ban content early. And so I don't have to disrupt the video later. Let me just say, folks, if you need some cards, because we are going to have massive shakeups in both Legacy and Modern, maybe as well in some other formats if you are following those, please consider checking out my sponsor, TOAmagic.com. You can use promo code ThrabenU to save a little bit on your order, 5%, and you always get free shipping. Get your Splinter Twins here, baby. And let me also say that my Mox field is going to be updated with a ton of post-ban legacy deck lists very, very quickly as well. So if you want to see what I've been playing or what I will be playing, it's all going to be up there. With the businessy stuff out of the way, let's get into the meat of the content for today. So this is going to be a pretty hearty BNR update. Pioneer, Jegantha is banned. Modern, the One Ring, Amped Raptor, and Jegantha are banned. Mox Opal, Green Sun Zenith, Faithless Looting, and Splinter Twin are unbanned. Oh baby. Legacy, Psychic Frog, and Vexing Bauble are banned. Explorer, Jegantha the Wellspring is banned. And I kind of want to go through this bit by bit here. And since most of you are Legacy players, I'm going to start down here, and then I want to loop back, and I want to talk about Modern quite a bit, actually. This is going to be one of those days where we have a few pages worth of notes for this video. All right, so Psychic Frog has been banned. Let's start there. So we know that Psychic Frog probably should have been banned in the previous ban wave, and they chose to just ban Grief despite the advice of their legacy expert saying that Psychic Frog should also be banned. And answering only Grief, banning only Grief, failed to lower the win rate and meta share of the blue-black Reanimator deck to an acceptable degree. And given the data that we have seen from the blue-black Reanimator deck in terms of how much it is being played, which is like roughly twice as much as the next deck in the line, and its sustained win rate over time while having a massive bullseye on its back, something else needed to go from the deck list. And Psychic Frog was the thing that they chose. And they cite the fact that this is not just for the blue-black Reanimator deck list, but also for what they are calling the Dimir Murktide decks, which I think is them trying to use the same sort of terminology as they are seeing in Modern. They probably mean like the Dimir Tempo deck list, as many of us more entrenched in the Legacy scene would call it. And one of the things that they cite here as a problem is that there's no diversity in these tempo archetypes. You don't need to splash another color because right now the blue-black shell itself is just so incredibly strong with Psychic Frog at the core. You don't need red for Lightning Bolt or DRC. You don't need green or you don't need white. And Psychic Frog is just putting up an absolutely dominating performance in Legacy, not just within the context of the blue-black Reanimator shell, but also within the Tempo shell, and in some other places as well that aren't discussed in the article, because, you know, we get like 3 paragraphs per card or something like that, and so Psychic Frog has been banned. And in their next paragraph here, they start talking about Entomb and Reanimate as potential ban targets. So they were in the conversation. but there is the fear that removing either one of those cards completely invalidates Reanimator as an archetype, which is something that they did not want to do. I have a lot of thoughts here. I'm going to try to do this in an order that makes at least somewhat sense. I'll get big here for a minute. I understand not wanting to get rid of Reanimate as a pillar. I think it can survive in some capacity without those cards. It might fully be surviving in a tier 2 capacity, but I don't think the archetype itself is fully dead. Legacy has a really big card pool. The next best things that do these effects are considerably worse, but I think you make Reanimator from a clear problem to a thing you can still probably illegally play if you eliminate one of those two cards. The Psychic Frog ban itself is, I think, objectively a correct call, and they should receive some praise for making a correct banning. I think it is important to say, like, yes, you did get this right. I think it already should have happened months ago, but at least we are getting it now. I think this was a pretty miserable card to play against. However, I am not the biggest fan of some of their justifications for banning, because I think there is a lot of low-hanging fruit that they missed here in writing this ban description. So this is not about Psychic Frog. This is about Grief and Reanimator's win rate. This is tangentially about Psychic Frog, but it's more about Entomb and Reanimate. It's just saying that Psychic Frog is the fair plan B. So the core things that we get about Psychic Frog are actually really about Reanimator. Like, if you look at this paragraph here, this is about Reanimator stuff. Circumventing anti-graveyard technology by having an extremely efficient fair plan. And here we see them talking about Psychic Frog being strong enough that you don't need to splash colors into your deck list. But when I talk about reasons why Psychic Frog being banned, these aren't the things that I'm saying. So it's really weird to me that they're not making the very, very obvious Dreadhorde Arcanist comparison, right? This is a 2-mana card that, if left unchecked, it snowballs the game all by itself. And every time that Legacy has had a 2-mana source of card advantage that is broken, the format has collapsed around it. And I think that's low-hanging fruit that was missed here. I think it's really weird that this does not talk about the invalidation of the combat step. Psychic Frog beats damn near everything in combat. Just objectively speaking, you can funnel cards into this and beat just about everything Legacy has to offer, including things that cost literally twice as much mana as it. And one of the play patterns that has been really, really frustrating for me is I might have a 5/5 creature and I just can't attack into fucking Psychic Frog. And if I don't attack into it and pass the turn, my opponent can then make it fly, draw a card, answer my own threat, and then I am in a terrible, terrible situation. And we are seeing nothing about, like, those bad gameplay patterns as for why Psychic Frog is banned. Everything that is here is talking about Reanimator specifically, and not about Psychic Frog's actual play patterns. So, like, the card 100% needs to be banned in the format. It's unhealthy. But all this ban discourse is talking about, like, very, very, very much is focused on the blue-black Reanimator deck and not on Psychic Frog itself as the problem. So the way that this read came off very strange to me. I also wish they would have owned up to the fact that this should have been banned previously. Like, they were told to ban this card, and they explicitly ignored that advice, and then they had to ban this card. And when we get the ban explanation, I don't feel like we got a good ban explanation. So I am happy that Psychic Frog is leaving the format. This was the absolute bare minimum thing that needed to be done to make Legacy interesting again. And it did occur. It is just surprising to me that we ended up with the text that we did, where so much of this focuses on Reanimator as a deck, and then they say, like, okay, we're banning Psychic Frog because it's so good in this Reanimator deck, and then not taking action on a piece of the Reanimator shell as well. Because this Reanimator shell is fucking cracked, like we've figured that out, right? So Entomb Reanimate plus roughly 2 fatties is 10 cards that can be shoved into any blue-black deck. And while occasionally we might just see, like, okay, the large creature got stuck in hand now that we can't just use Psychic Frog to discard it for free in this fair capacity, like, we will still see some of that. Like, I do not expect that this is going to disappear. I think we will still have a very, very viable blue-black Reanimator deck in some capacity, even with Psychic Frog gone. So I wonder if we will be left wanting for more bans from this blue-black shell when it comes to our next BNR update, which will be in March, I believe. So now let's go ahead and talk about Vexing Bauble, which was also banned in Legacy. And they make it very clear one of the pillars of Legacy is free counter magic. That is just something that is part of the Legacy experience itself, and this is a statement that I agree with. It is part of the glue that holds the format together. That is something that I agree with. The entire metagame revolves around, like, Force of Will, Daze, to a much lesser extent things like Force of Negation, being able to check broken combo decks. And when you can ignore the counter magic of Legacy, when you can ignore the glue that is making everyone play fair, the format speeds up a lot. And accordingly, they have banned Vexing Bauble because of its inherent strength against a pillar of the format. Once again, I do not like how they have presented their argument here. So they say that there is a, quote, concerning win rate among decks that play Vexing Bauble. And to that, I say, what decks and what's the number? I am unhappy that we do not have more information here. So if we look at decks that are referenced up here, there's Mystic Forge combo, which is probably the obvious one that we're talking about here. Painter Servant combo and other red Ancient Tomb decks are things being listed as using Vexing Bauble. In crunching numbers for things like the Eternal Weekend data, Painter and Red Stompy were not doing well. I forget the number. I want to say it was something like Red Stompy decks had like a 30% win rate versus Dimir Tempo, and I believe also a negative win rate versus Blue-Black Reanimator. Like, it had very bad numbers versus some portions of the top of the metagame. And Painter Servant, I think, was batting like roughly 50%. I think it was positive at one of the Eternal Weekends and negative at another one. So those are not decks that I think the data is showing Vexing Bauble is a problem in. And if they want to say Vexing Bauble is a problem for the format, I would like to see why in terms of the data, which this BNR update does not accomplish. This does not say something like Mystic Forge had a 58 sustained win percentage on Magic Online over a period of time. Like, we don't get any numbers here to back this up. When you say something has a concerning win rate and you don't attach any data to that, that leaves me kind of wondering, like, was this card banned or community outcry after the first of the two most recent Eternal Weekend events, where it had a absolutely batshit insane run and then had a just regular above average performance the following weekend, I think. I am unhappy with the wording here. And there's very little of substance to actually dig into, right? So this is what we get on Vexing Bauble. And then this is the only time that Mystic Forge combo is mentioned. We get that this is a recent development. We get that it's successful, powerful, has a concerning win rate, and a strength against counterspells. And that's like all we get. So I am happy with this decision to ban this card, but I feel like the information here is inadequate to lead to the conclusion for why this card was banned. I am left wanting in reading this. I feel like this is a situation where Wizards of the Coast should have shown their work and said, like, this is what the numbers look like. This is why we have chosen to ban it, even though this ban discourse is new. Like, Psychic Frog ban discourse has been going on since months prior to our previous BNR update. Vexing Bauble stuff, like, that's 2 or 3 weeks old for the most part, as far as like public outcry for banning. That is with our American Eternal weekend, where the deck absolutely dominated. So again, I am happy with the bans that they did for both of the cards in Legacy. I believe those were objectively correct and very good decisions, but I do not feel like this article articulates well why the cards should have been banned. So I think this is a case of like, I got the right answer, but I did not show my work, or I did not give good reasoning why the cards should have gone. And part of the reason for why these might feel lacking is that this legacy section was written by Dan Musser. This legacy section was not written by their legacy expert. So I think we got a BNR update written by someone who is not actually engaged with the format, even though they have gotten information from people who are engaged in the format. And that might be why I feel like this BNR update just misses the mark. I mean this as respectfully as possible, but I think someone who does not know what they were doing was given an assignment that they should not have been given. I would much rather have had this written by someone who was dialed into Legacy, and I don't think we got that. Now let's talk about Nadu, and this is going to be a pretty meaty section here. I'm just going to read this verbatim. Quote, with Psychic Frog and Vexing Bauble removed from the format, several of the top decks will need to change. The recent success of Nadu variants, Cephalid Breakfast, and Bant Green Sun Zenith decks has us keeping a close eye on Nadu Winged Wisdom. For now, we believe today's changes should navigate the format into a more diverse and healthy position. End quote. Alright, so Nadu is officially on the shit list. Nadu is on the watch list. And the current belief is that the 2 changes that they made to Legacy today will be enough to push Legacy in a healthy direction. So this article cites 2 Nadu decks, Cephalid Breakfast and Bant Nadu. There aren't 2 Nadu decks in Legacy, there are 3. There is Cephalid Breakfast, and by that we mean a deck that has up to 2 A plus B combos. You can have Nomads in Core and or Shuko, plus either Cephalid Illusionist and Nadu. There is a Bant Nadu deck that is a sort of Green Sun mid-range control deck list that has a combo finish in Nadu and Nomads in Core. And then beyond that, there is a Nadu Elves deck list that seeks to turbo out the Nadu combo with a large amount of ramp and more tutors than normal. And that one also plays a Green Sun finish. So immediately, when you write an article and you tell me that there are 2 Nadu decks and not 3, that shows me that you're not that informed. And like, missing the Nadu Elves is a really big deal because that was incredibly successful at our last Eternal weekend. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I want to say like there were 3 or 4 relevant finishes with that style of deck. And we know that Nadu has already been banned in Modern previously, and we have a direct quote from Michael Majors in the article that explained why Nadu was banned. Quote, Nadu was a design mistake, end quote. Just objectively speaking, that card was poorly designed. It had a last-minute change that resulted in the Nomads in Core / Shuko interaction that we know and love. And Nadu has been removed from Modern and I believe multiple other formats as well at this point. I think they axed it in Commander, if memory serves. And Legacy is often a place where design mistakes get to live and thrive. But Nadu is not a card that they missed the power level on. Nadu is a card that they just fucked up at the last minute because they didn't proofread their homework. And the problem with leaving Nadu legal is that there's not great ways to fight Nadu. So generally speaking, a lot of traditional hate for decks doesn't apply to the Nadu deck list because they have multiple overlapping plans. So for example, you cast Stony Silence to stop Shuko. Cool, I will combo with Nomads in Core. Alright, I have Leyline of the Void or Rest in Peace so that I can shut off Thassa's Oracle being reanimated after you go and combo with Cephalid Illusionist. Cool, that doesn't do anything to Nadu plus Nomads in core, and you can just win the game just as easily there. All right, I do something else that interacts with Nadu. All right, cool. Nadu triggers, I draw a card. Draw a card by activating Nadu's ability. So Nadu is always going to be a card ahead of you if you answer it once it is in play. Sometimes you can run into, like, okay, I have a removal spell for the Nadu, but your opponent has Nomads in core in play already. So, like, you answer the Nomads in core while it's on the stack, because otherwise they can just combo off in response to you using the removal spell on the Nadu. And it just kind of leads to some really bad play patterns. Nadu is also one of the worst decks I've ever played against in terms of my own personal time. It's about as bad as Modern Eggs or Crack Clan Ironwork combo was, where like you just walk away and like you could come back 5 minutes later and your opponent is still comboing and taking game actions. There's a very famous anecdote about a player who was like, "Hey judge, I've got to go to the bathroom. Can you see if my opponent is taking legal game actions while I'm gone?" And I feel like the Nadu deck is in the same capacity, where it often takes your opponent a very, very large amount of time in order to win the game once they start doing their Nadu thing. And especially on platforms like Magic Online, where you can't necessarily shortcut things, it's not great. There are very few decks that I will just like shut my camera off, walk away, use the bathroom, and then come back to see what's going on afterwards. And this deck is one of them. I am slightly unhappy that this ended up on the watch list without action being taken on it here. And if we're thinking about deck design, I think it is very hard for decks to have enough removal to answer everything that the Nadu deck is putting on the board. So you conceptually need to answer the Delighted Halfling that comes out on turn 1, because that can ramp you into an uncounterable Nadu on turn 2. And that is a problem, because that is something that is ignoring the counterspells that are supposed to be keeping decks like this in check. Or sometimes you might need to, say, counter a Nomads in core that you don't actually want to counter because your opponent has Delighted Halfling and could force down a Nadu later. And if you don't counter the bad card, you might not be able to counter the good card later. And you end up in this really awkward spot where you just have to use resources in bad ways. Allosaurus Shepherd out of the Nadu Elves deck can accomplish the same sort of thing, where your opponent just has lots of ways to make it so that they get to ignore counterspells, which is something that we, had just talked about with Vexing Bauble was problematic for the format. And I think in terms of ratios, it used to be that a lot of legacy decks were built with 4 removal spells, like 4 lightning bushes, lightning bolts, or 4 swords to plowshares, and then you kind of might play 1 or 2 more in flex slots. And we tend to play more removal than that these days. But if the Nadu decks are playing 4 Nadus and 4 Green Suns to find them, and a bunch of cantrips on top of that, and they might have things like Urza Saga to tutor up Shuko, or other ways like Natural Order of putting things into play. Like, the Nadu deck is probably much better at finding their combo pieces multiple times than you are at finding your removal spells multiple times, especially if you need to do something like answer a Delighted Halfling, answer a Nomads in core, answer a Nadu, and you need to kind of like do all of those things to keep pace with the game. It is very hard for legacy decks to just like removal spell, removal spell, removal spell, especially if control as a pillar in the format is not very good. More on that a little bit later. So if you are a tournament spike, I really recommend looking into Nadu decks for the next 3 months. I think Nadu in some capacity is going to be a premier combo deck of the format. I think it is fast. I think it is resilient. I think it is hard to hate on. I think it is very difficult to sideboard against. I would not be surprised that within about 2 weeks, we will figure out which one of the Nadu decks is the best, and we might feel like not acting on Nadu immediately was a mistake. And then we just get stuck with Nadu being one of the better decks or the best deck in the format for 3 months. I fully expect that we will come to regret leaving Nadu legal in the format, and that Nadu will exit in March. That being said, some of the advice that we give very frequently on the Eternal Glory podcast is play the format that you have. So Nadu is legal. Nadu is going to be one of the better things to do. There's going to be roughly 3 different Nadu decks that are probably all going to be quite good, and you should adjust appropriately. You should figure out what it is you are going to be doing to attack this matchup. Maybe you want Pithing Needles for Nomads in core. Maybe you want some Red Elemental Blast to answer Nadu on the stack rather than on the battlefield. Maybe you want to run some more sort of niche card that shuts off activated abilities of creatures or something like that. So for example, you could look at something like Cursed Totem, which says activated abilities of creatures can't be activated. This hits Nomads in core very hard. This shuts off mana abilities of mana dorks like Delighted Halfling, shuts off activated abilities of things like Allosaurus Shepherd. This can be very strong. The problem is, like, Shuko exists, right? So if your opponent has both Nomads in core and Shuko, a Cursed Totem does not actually shut off both. So you might have to get a little more creative in answering Nadu if Nadu becomes a premier deck. And if you got some hot tech for that, please throw that down in the comments below. Everyone, I'm sure, would appreciate it. All right, so now we're going to do some metagame predictions, just kind of like some level 1 stuff. What can we expect going forward? Number 1, Chalice of the Void is now unbanned. We saw most Ancient Tomb decks gravitating towards Vexing Bauble, as it was just a fantastic shield versus counterspells, while also occasionally being some main deckable hate versus free artifact mana that, you know, a Storm deck, for example, might be trying to abuse. And with Vexing Bauble gone, these decks are often going to go back to Chalice of the Void, as that is a premier way to fight back against the blue decks, although Chalice of the Void fights against their cantrips and removal spells instead of fighting against their counter spells. So from your decks like Moon Stompy, expect to start seeing Chalice of the Void main deck once again. That being said, the Ancient Tomb meta share was really, really high. It is going to probably drop a little bit, as many of these Ancient Tomb decks were being propped up by Vexing Bauble in the current metagame. So I would expect to see fewer copies of Ancient Tomb overall. The Mystic Forge deck, for example, losing Vexing Bauble means that counterspells are now live against them, and now they don't have this like really good bait spell to take the initial force of will, and they don't have this thing that just shuts off counter magic for the rest of the game. So cards like Consigned to Memory that were previously being used to fight against these Mystic Forge decks, if the blue decks now get to use the 3 or 4 copies they're running of that, and they get to use their Force of Wills and Dazes and Force of Negations again, we have a much better chance of keeping Mystic Forge style decks in line than we did with Vexing Bauble legal. As a whole, the format probably slows down a little bit. Prior to this ban, we had one of the fastest legacy formats, like maybe ever. It was just very unhealthy, with control basically being fully pushed out of the metagame. Now the Force of Will decks get a chance to combat the decks that were previously running Bauble. And while there are going to be many decks in the format whose speed was not touched as a result of this banning, something like the Mystic Forge combo deck referenced in the ban article, like that deck does objectively slow down a lot. Not in terms of its raw speed, but in terms of its average effective kill speed through expected interaction. The format's still probably pretty fast, though. Like, there are a lot of people running around in leagues just jamming things like Oops All Spells. The Eldrazi deck can still go pretty turbo and have some ridiculous turn 2s when Ayabugan gets involved. And Vexing Bauble leaving the format does not change the theoretical goldfish speed of many of these decks, because some of them weren't even playing Vexing Bauble to start with. So if the format slows down a little bit, we can expect control to return in some capacity. It is unclear to me whether or not control decks will be able to actually keep up with the speed of current Legacy. Current Legacy is very powerful and very fast. So do you want to be the person playing 2 or 3 win conditions, 2 copies of 4th Aerlingas and maybe 1 Planeswalker or something like that? Like, do you want to be that person in current Legacy? Or do you want to be the person jamming a combo with a counterspell backup? And I think I know very clearly where I would like to be. I think it is fine to explore some things like Jeskai Control or maybe, 3 to 5 color beans again. I'm not sure that they are going to end up being the better things going on in the format, though. If you are a blue mage, I would be encouraging you to look at Tamiyo Inquisitive Student, Orcish Bowmasters, and Barrogoyf. I think those are quite powerful cards. Bowmaster's metagame presence dropped by, I don't know, roughly 20% over the last couple of months as Psychic Frog just took more and more and more over. I expect that, for the blue decks to hate on each other, we will start seeing more Orcish Bowmasters again. If games slow down and you have more time to crack clues, Tamiyo starts looking better and better and better. And if Reanimator style decks are looking for the fair thing to bully people with, Barrogoyf is pretty good at that. That often comes down in a fair game is something like a 4-5 to a 6-7, and that card just fucks. It doesn't literally draw a card like Psychic Frog does, but these cards like Barrogoyf and Tamiyo that give you card advantage in some capacity every turn are worth a lot. They have some downsides. If someone is slamming a Rest in Peace, your Goyfs and your Murktide regions will end up looking really bad. But Rest in Peace is pretty rare as of right now. It's very slow against the actual blue-black Reanimator deck. So instead, we get things like Leyline of the Void, or Surgical Extraction, or Fairy Macabre, which aren't really good against just a Goyf that is there to attack you with a large lifelinky, death-touchy body. I think it's still very, very easy to play a blue-black tempo deck or a blue-black Reanimator deck that has a fair backup plan. I have written in my notes, and I think it's very important to note this here, that I wrote, quote, still very easy to play a blue-black X tempo deck. With Psychic Frog gone, it is possible that you end up wanting to go into another color. So, for example, maybe you want to play Grixis because you want access to Meltdown now that you don't have Psychic Frog. Because let me tell you, Psychic Frog was really fucking good against Urza's Saga, because the Psychic Frog was often just better than the Urza Saga tokens. And it was not particularly close in most cases, unless you control 11 artifacts or something absurd like that. So maybe you need Meltdown to combat Urza's Saga decks, and, the Grim Monoliths and Voltaic Keys / Manifold Keys of the world. Maybe you need a little bit more there. Maybe you don't, though. That's going to be one of those time will tell sorts of things. If you are an Ancient Tomb gamer and you want to do similar play patterns to what you have been doing, you could consider main decking Defense Grid. Defense Grid is so much worse than Vexing Bauble, though. So it's double the mana for a similar ability. It's not quite the same thing, but a similar power level ability. There's a couple of key differences here. Number one, let's say that you have Force of Will. So versus Vexing Bauble, Force of Will costs 5 mana. Versus Defense Grid, Force of Will costs 3 mana. That 2 mana is an insane, absolutely insane degree of difference. Now, your defense grids might be better against other counterspells. Think your Spell Pierces, your Fluster Storms, things of that nature, Consign to Memory. Vexing Bauble didn't touch those, whereas Defense Grid makes it cost more. But there were a lot of times where a deck might open on something like Planar Nexus, which makes 1 mana, Vexing Bauble. You don't get to go Planar Nexus Defense Grid. If you wanted to play your Defense Grid, it would take your next turn to do so. And so you had these lines where you got to go Vexing Bauble on 1, play Urza's Tower on 2, now you have 4 mana, and just immediately go into Mystic Forge or the One Ring or Karn or whatever immediately. And that play pattern breaks here. You would need something like Ancient Tomb on 1 into another land that produces 2 on turn 2 in order to do that. And I think that's much harder to do. The other way Defense Grid is obviously worse is that Vexing Bauble cantrips at worst. So when you don't need the Vexing Bauble or you need to play to your outs, you can just sacrifice that to draw a card. and you don't get to do that with Defense Grid. So when you have Defense Grid versus, you know, a Death and Taxes deck, a Maverick deck, or something of that nature that's not actually playing counter spells, like you don't get to just replace that card for free. There were some other decks that were playing Vexing Baubles defensively. Think about things like the Epic Storm that were playing their own Vexing Baubles alongside Veil of Summer. You can Veil of Summer to make it so your stuff can't be countered, and then you can ignore your Vexing Bauble while your opponent's free counter magic is still getting countered. Decks like that are going to need a conceptual rebuild. You know, the pilots will be on that. They'll figure that out pretty quickly. But there's probably more collateral damage from the Vexing Bauble bans than is immediately obvious to you, unless you are just like super dialed into Legacy. So, all right, Defense Grid, you can go away. Your job here is done. So I think as a result of the bans, we are going to reach a more pleasant Legacy than what we have right now. I think these are two very good bans. I think these have taken a lot of pressure off of the format. But does more pleasant Legacy actually mean good Legacy? That I am not sure about. That is unclear to me as of right now. I think we still have a very noticeable uptick in power in current Legacy, with the last 2 years of summer sets being to blame for that. So 2 years ago, we got the One Ring, and then we got from the Lord of the Rings set, and then we got Modern Horizons 3, which gave us so much stuff. Something like Eldrazi just has insane nut draws on turn 2 when Eye of Ugin and Glaring Fleshraker get involved. I have seen, you know, people string together multiple sowing mycospawns in the same turn cycle. You know, you can tutor up multiple wastelands when you do that, and that can lead to some very unhealthy one-sided games. The let's just generically call them the Cloud Post style deck lists that ramp via Planar Nexus in one capacity or another, with Cloud Post or the entire Urzatron or just Urza's Tower. Generically speaking, those sorts of big mana decks now have absurdly consistent mana due to Planar Nexus, and the One Ring in those decks is very busted. They are very good at powering that out, and the deck can do some obnoxious things backed by the One Ring. And then the Mystic Forge combo deck, which is kind of distinct from that, also can do some very gross things with the One Ring. We are probably going to see a very powerful blue-black Reanimator hybrid deck of some kind still within the format. I don't expect that to change. The Nadu decks are still going to be very fast, offering a turn 2 or turn 3 Goldfish, oftentimes with some sort of innate protection via Allosaurus Shepherd or Delighted Halfling or a Force of Will of some capacity. I think we're going to need a couple of weeks to get a feel for the format as it stands now. I am worried that it's still going to be a little fast. I am worried that some of the play patterns are going to be unhealthy, but I'm going to try to approach it from an optimistic point of view. I am ultimately happy that things did get banned within Legacy. I wish more things would have gone, but play the format you have. I'm going to try to be excited, and I think this is, despite the fact that I wish more would have happened, I think this is a positive thing for Legacy as a whole, and I do want that to be noted here, even though I am unhappy with some specifics of how the BNR update was handled. Let's transition into talking about Modern now. The section on Modern is beefy. Like, it is absolutely massive. You know, I can pretty much fit all the Legacy stuff onto one screen here, minus half a sentence. Whereas the Modern stuff is a couple scroll pages worth. It's a really big update, and I think a very good update. So the One Ring, Jegantha, and Amped Raptor get banned in Modern. And I am on board with one of those. One of the things I say at the very beginning here is, going into this announcement, it was clear that Modern needed the most help among our competitive formats. And I'm an entrenched Legacy player, and I think Legacy needed a lot of help. But I think people just hated Modern. They were not happy to be playing that format. They weren't having fun playing that format. It was very much dominated by a couple of decks, in particular Boros Energy, and that is clear to me even as an outsider of the format. So I think getting rid of the one ring because it had something absurd like a 60% play rate in the format is a slam dunk. Banning something from the energy deck is great. And just getting rid of Jegantha because, even even a weak card that is a companion is still a free card. And if the deck building restrictions are so minimal, which Jegantha's is, that it's like borderline free for decks, I think getting rid of that for the sake of diversity is a slam dunk. So like A plus, no real notes on this. You turn down the Jegantha meta share, you turn down Boros energy, maybe without fully killing the deck. You eliminate stale one ring play patterns, like thumbs up. But that's not what I'm excited about. I'm excited about this shit right here. Inject this directly into my veins. Mox Opal unbanned, Green Sun Zenith unbanned, Faithless Looting unbanned, Splinter Twin unbanned. And what you have done here, and I think we're going to use a technical term here, you have restored the boomer spirit to Modern. That's what I think you have done here. I think Modern lacked a core identity. I have felt like the last few years of Modern has primarily just been powerful cards from summer sets. And some people have that same degree of complaint about Legacy, but in Legacy at least you have some really old broken shit to balance that out. Whereas Modern is a younger format and it doesn't have as much of that innate broken shit. And bannings previously have taken out a lot of the things that I considered central to Modern's identity. A decade ago, when I was playing Modern, twice a week, I would, pretty much never miss a Modern night, and I would try to do Modern events on the weekends as well. Like, I was very invested in Modern. And that was at the time when Birthing Pod and Splinter Twin and a few broken combos and Affinity and all those things were running around. And I felt like Modern had a core identity. And I have not really felt like Modern has had a good core identity to itself in a number of years. This is my opinion as an outsider who is not invested in the format. And I think these unbannings bring back a lot of that spirit of Modern that is missing. Brings back some of those artifact decks, brings back some of those toolboxy elements that people were very worried about when Birthing Pod got banned. Brings back some broken graveyard stuff, brings back Splinter Twin, which is maybe one of the most beloved combo decks of all time. People fucking love Splinter Twin, myself included. Like, I think Splinter Twin is a fan favorite. Every BNR update that was announced in like the last 10 years, Splinter Twin spikes before it. Like, people hope, people pray. They offer their prayers to Keranos or whatever gods they worship that Splinter Twin can get unbanned, and it finally has happened. This seems like a huge win for Wizards of the Coast. I think this restores a lot of faith in Modern as a format. And I think Splinter Twin is totally on par with the things that the format currently has access to, and things like pitch elementals, force of negation. Like, there is free interaction for Splinter Twin now that was not so much around when it got banned a decade ago or so. I also personally think Splinter Twin provides really interesting play patterns for like what you do with your mana, how you sequence your things, whether or not you actually go for a Splinter Twin combo, or whether or not you just throw your Splinter Twin on a value creature like a Wall of Omens or a Flame Tongue Kavu or something. Like, I think Splinter Twin is very, very cool as a deck concept. I enjoy playing it a lot. Mox Opal is a very powerful and very iconic card, often the backbone of affinity-style deck lists. I think the hate for this card is much, much stronger than when this card originally got banned. We have our collector oofs of the world. We have Wrath of the Skies. I think Meltdown is now modern and legal. I think there are better ways to keep artifact decks in check than there used to be. And I think that's probably a good unbanning. Green Sun Zenith seems sweet in Modern. I enjoyed having that card legal previously. This is going to sound a little silly to say out loud, but Green Sun Zenith costs you an extra mana to get the creature that you want. And my understanding as an outsider is that Modern is really fucking fast. Not quite Legacy fast, but very, very fast. And so adding a mana onto the speed onto the cost of your creature is very real within the confines of this format. I think this is perfectly fine as far as a card choice goes. One of their goals in unbanning this was to increase metagame diversity. I think that is a good argument. I will say that with the caveat that if this just ends up being yet another way to find a Primeval Titan and Amulet finally like gets a little bit too good, like there could be some degree of concern there. But I am not dialed in enough to the format to know whether or not that is realistically going to be a problem. Just kind of doing the what is it? Armchair cowboy, backseat driver, kind of whatever you want to do that. I think on the surface, this unban gets a thumbs up from me, but you know, I'll keep an eye on that one. Faithless Looting also gets unbanned. That one is a little worrying to me. Generally speaking, when someone casts a Faithless Looting, I just know they're up to no fucking good, right? Like, I don't think, oh, Faithless Looting, that's so cool. I think, oh, Faithless Looting, like, fuck, I'm gonna get dredged, or I'm gonna get hogacked, or I'm gonna get reanimated. Like, when people cast Faithless Looting, that is generally speaking going to lead to a negative play experience on my end, as I am just going to fucking die. Faithless Looting, I believe, was banned for Hogaak's crimes, if memory serves. Again, I'm not the biggest follower of Modern. I hope that this does not snap anything in half within the confines of Modern. Abundant graveyard hate options do exist. Endurance is one of them that is cited specifically within the article. That is free graveyard hate. Boggart Trawler, the MDFC, that's a 3-1 that Bojuka Bogs on the back, was listed as another one. But historically, a lot of times when I was invested in Modern, there was this problem of trying to answer everything at the same time. So, like, if there is a dominant graveyard hate deck, if there's a dominant graveyard deck, you could hate that out in the sideboard. And if there was a dominant artifact deck, you could probably hate both of those out in the sideboard at the same time. But then if there's also, like, a land-based strategy or a control deck or a tempo deck that you have to work with, you maybe can't, like, get your hands on all of those different hate cards at the same time. And if Modern is doing sweeping unbans, which mean that you have to respect Splinter Twin combo while respecting the graveyard, while respecting the graveyard deck, while respecting the fair GSZ deck that can also have a combo finish, that might put a lot of strain on sideboards. And if you aren't able to properly hate on the graveyard, maybe that ends up in a scary place overall. I am not sure exactly where the bans are as far as the supporting cast of graveyard hate stuff goes in Modern. But of, like, the stuff that got unbanned here, Faithless Looting is the one that scares me the most. I don't think it is the objectively broken, Splinter Twin A+B combo that is actually worrying. I think it is Faithless Looting representing a wide range of graveyard things that scares me. And just another side note here, while I really dug into the text of the Legacy article very, very strongly, the Modern one is very, very long. I do encourage you to read it if you intend on playing Modern. I think there is a lot of good information in here. And one of the reasons that I can nitpick the Legacy one so well is because I'm very, very dialed into the format in a way that I am not dialed in for Modern. So I did not feel that it was proper to critique, the exact wording and information presented here when I don't understand Modern super, super well myself. But, like, please pay me to play Splinter Twin variants. I'm very, very excited about that. And you'll probably see much more Modern content from me in the coming months, as I love Splinter Twin so much. As a side note, since I forgot to say it during the intro, Mark, thank you very much for giving me a dealer's choice donation deck list that helped fund the creation of this video. I very much appreciate it. While most of the time I use donation deck lists to, play a deck list, occasionally I think it's important to make long-form videos like this that talk about relevant things in the Magic world. So let's do some final thoughts on this. Generally speaking, as a whole, I believe that this is a good BNR update. I don't think it's a great one. I think it's a good one. I think if you are a Modern player specifically, I think this is a great update for you. But I think if you are a Legacy player, you are probably going to be left wanting by this. I think many Legacy players would have appreciated more aggressive bannings than just what we got today. I am not actively upset by Wizards' decisions here. I do believe that the cards that got banned should be banned. I believe that is a good decision. and we might have to wait a couple more months in order to see some more action taken. That's not the end of the world, hopefully. I think the biggest win from today is restoring faith in Modern as a competitive format. Legacy deals with issues of reserved list cards, and that is the reserved list is probably something that we are not going to see abolished. And so supporting formats that do not have the reserved list makes sense. And if Modern, which is your oldest non-reserved list format, is in a very, very bad place, like what are players expected to do with all of their older cards? And if the answer is nothing, the collector dash players amongst like the Magic population are going to be relatively unhappy, right? People want to play their old cool cards. People like me, we love to play the oldest and coolest cards. But for a very, very sizable portion of Magic players, owning a legacy deck or owning a vintage deck is just not realistic. But owning a modern deck should be within striking distance of most players, especially if they have been playing for a few years. So I think you need to do something to keep those players happy. You want those enfranchised players to have a place to play their cool older cards. And Modern should be that. And I think they have injected a lot of life into Modern. I think they have fixed some problems with Modern while doing some things that is going to draw back in like an older generation of Modern players, while also giving some life to the format for the people who are grinding tournaments. I think Modern is very interesting towards people who are looking to like break metagames and adapt to a new unknown metagame. I think this does a lot to make Magic more exciting, and that gives a thumbs up from me. Now, I do want to just sort of end this with a bit of caution. Now, I do have this slight fear that an immediate best deck emerges shortly after this announcement, and then there is no ability to deal with that thing until March. That kind of fucking sucks. Like, Legacy in particular might immediately have a Nadu problem that is visible in 2 weeks, and then we're just stuck with it. And I think if you want to stay on this cycle of only banning things every 3-ish months, I think you have to be very, very aggressive with format management. And we are not seeing aggressive format management in Legacy. We're kind of perpetually in this one ban cycle behind thing. When Grief left the format, Psychic Frog should have gone with it. And now Psychic Frog has left the format alongside Vexing Bauble, but I am very worried that it's going to be abundantly clear that Nadu or some other card should have left with it immediately. And then we just end up with kind of a stale format very quickly, where it might just be the same couple of things are still just the best. It's very possible that just a blue-black Reanimator deck and a Mystic Forge the One Ring deck and a Nadu deck of some kind just end up being the best things very, very early on in the format, and they just stay that way for months and months and months. And I am slightly worried that we end up with a stagnant format relatively quickly, but I am going to try to remain optimistic, and I am going to be very, very excited in recording my videos when I get around to like doing a power recording session over the weekend, where I hopefully deal with some Legacy and some Modern. With that, I think I'll go ahead and wrap things up here. I hope this was useful. Get down in those comments. Let me know kind of what you think of the decisions both for Legacy and Modern. Would actually legitimately love to hear your thoughts on that. Remember, this video that I released on Monday replaces my normal Tuesday video, so there will not be a Tuesday video at 11 a.m. Eastern. The next one will be on Wednesday, since you got 2 today. All right. Have a wonderful rest of the day, folks. Get brewing. See ya.